Most businesses only focus on growing and expanding, and they give little to no attention to their exit strategies until after exit is staring them in the face. Learn here at Boosting Business Value, brought to you by Blue Sky Business Resources. You'll discover how to shape a more durable and saleable business, and how to implement a powerful, well-planned, and rewarding exit. Join Dr. David Gruder and Jason Tuzinkewich as they deliver actionable tips for lower middle market company owners, executives, and their trusted advisors. Find out where your business currently stands, how you can meet your revenue objectives more reliably, and how to grow your venture to the next level, all with a smooth and fruitful exit in mind. Here are your hosts, Dr. David and Jason.
Welcome back. We're in part 3 of our mini-series on the 3 inflection points that all businesses must master to achieve durability and long-term growth. This episode, we're going to dive into the inflection point that I have to confess I am the worst at. We're going to talk about the fruition phase. For those of you who are new to the Boosting Business program, I'm Jason Tuzinkewich. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Blue Sky Business Resources. And with me, as always, is my partner in crime and trusty colleague, Dr. David Gruder. He is Blue Sky's business lifecycle, exit planning, and post-acquisition psychologist. David, take it away.
What a mouthful.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Well, we'll start off this episode the way that we are in each of these segments in this mini-series on inflection points, which is just with a quick review of what an inflection point is and what the inflection points are that we're covering. So an inflection point is a major functional pivot point where strategy, organization, tactics, and leadership requirements must change from what they were in the last inflection point, in the last phase of the cycle. And the whole notion of inflection points is that they aren't one and done, that the inflection point cycle is perpetual in durable businesses. We go through the phases of innovation, fruition, and bifurcation over and over again in successive cycles. And of course, in the next episode, the final episode in this mini-series, we'll be covering bifurcation, which is kind of like ambidexterity, and we'll get into that. But in this episode, we're focusing on the fruition inflection point and phase in this inflection point cycle.
Perfect. Thank you for that recap. That's wonderful. And let's get into the specifics. What happens when we talk about having this inflection from innovation to fruition? What are we talking about? What's going on here? And at the end of the day, this will kind of be a confessional of why do I suck at it? But starting out, the fruition phase is all about optimization. I love getting into the fruition phase. I just really am not great once we're there. So tell us, as we talk about optimization, what are we really talking about in successfully completing this fruition phase?
Well, funny you should ask that question. What we're doing in this fruition phase is we're refocusing away from the dynamic aspect of the first phase, the innovation phase, in favor of focusing on consistency, continuity, and quality of delivery. And I am going to take issue with what you said about yourself, because you're amazing. One of your superpowers is installing consistent frameworks for organizational consistency. You may not be the one that's thrilled with being the implementer of those things. And I can certainly say I'm not thrilled with being the implementer of those things, although you and I, in my judgment, are perfectly capable of doing those. That's not where our juice lives. But I know that a portion of your juice and superpower is in installing the mechanisms that allow optimization to occur.
Yes, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's very touching to hear. You're right. The creation and the installing, the innovation of the processes that allow for successful fruition, I think is well within what I love. It's the day-to-day once they're installed. And we go into this next thing, focusing only on small incremental improvements. It's like, come on, can't I just break something and build a new? Which is actually how and why I found the professions that I've been in and why I love doing what we do at Blue Sky, because we get to come in and do the creation and implementation and train people who are better attuned to managing throughout fruition. Let them do that piece, and I can go away and do more innovation.
I resemble that completely as well. And so part of optimization is systematizing processes so that everyone is on the same page. Everyone is doing things, quote unquote, the same way. And the reason that I'm putting the same way in quotes is that we would hope that each person is sticking to the procedures and the mechanisms, and they're implementing those things in their own authentic way, as long as their authenticity is not running counter to the procedures. So we're not talking about this kind of micromanaging conformity here. What we're talking about is a framework that everyone is on the exact same page about using. And that's the systematization of the processes that everyone is going to be utilizing.
Yeah. And this is great because it points back to what you said at the very beginning, where the central theme of successfully managing fruition is consistency, continuity, and quality at a quality expectation. And, I'd love to point anybody who is new to our podcast back to the episode we did on Kaizen, because Kaizen still exists in fruition.
Oh, yes.
We are still continuing it to improve. We're just not making bold, dynamic, huge, big changes to the system. Now we're making the system incrementally a little bit better each time. And once you've got that process down, you can start to automate. You can start to take the human element out of all the pieces of this process where a human component does not contribute to a better output. This is where we try to get things so consistent that we can put a robot on the line and take the critical thinking element of a human and put them back to something that's better utilizing their capacity for that critical thought, while ensuring that continuity and that quality through whatever the product or service is that we're delivering.
Well said. Very important, especially in the emerging AI/robotics phase that we are now well on our way into in the marketplace and in technology development. So those are the optimization focuses that we wanted to touch on in this episode. And then the other thing that happens during the fruition phase is its own variety, if you will, of optimization, but we broke it out into its own category that we're calling profitizing. So whereas optimization is about getting consistency and procedures down pat, profitizing involves a couple of things. And one of those is establishing cash flow consistency in the broader context of a durable growth curve, meaning that during the fruition phase, the focus having to do with profitizing is on creating a level of consistent reliability in revenues coming in. So just to connect this explicitly with the first phase, the innovation phase, in innovation, you're doing burn. You're burning through cash reserves because you haven't brought what you're innovating to the market yet. So of course, you're burning through reserves. That's what that phase focuses on. In the profitizing phase, you stop burning. It's not about burning. It's about making sure that everything that's being done establishes cash flow consistency and growing amounts of cash flow so that you're on a durably upswing kind of curve in your profitizing of what you've brought to the market.
Absolutely. Everything in fruition has to be up and to the right. I like to say the fruition phase is the portion in this cycle where all the bills get paid. You're paying for the innovation that was done to create this product or service, but you also know that every product and service has a finite lifetime in the market. And so first you pay the bills for the innovation, you put a little bit of money in the bank, and then you start to pay forward the reserves for the next phase, which is bifurcation, where we're going to start burning through some cash. Now, the nice thing about bifurcation is you're still capitalizing, you're still in fruition on the existing product as it starts to twilight, and you're spending money. So that burn isn't as painful as the first one, but all the bills get paid in profitizing. And so with that establishing cash flow consistency and durable growth, you also have to pay a lot of attention to margins. And if you tie the financial side, the profitizing side, with the optimization side, they're both trying to achieve the same end. You're using the optimization and the incremental improvements of production, the systematization and automation of the delivery of your product and service to make it cost less to deliver product or service. And so you're maximizing your economies of scale because now you're producing and distributing at scale. You can purchase in bigger quantities. Whatever resources you are, you're using more of them so you can start to get that cost savings on the resource side, but also you're getting that scale benefit on the production and delivery side.
Yes, for sure. And I realize what we probably should at least acknowledge that there are times during this phase when something that's called mezzanine funding is needed. But generally, mezzanine funding is for having a cash flow cushion so that you can continue to optimize and continue to be on the profitizing curve. Hopefully, you won't need mezzanine funding, however, during this phase.
No doubt. And for those of you who aren't finance people, mezzanine funding, what he's talking about, this is essentially, think about a credit card on the scale of millions of dollars. It's the highest interest debt that a business can take, but it's debt that doesn't mind being subordinate to normal bank financing or to warrants and debentures and things of that nature that you may do in your capital stream. So it's debt that can come in quick. It can come in second, and it's going to cost you. So it does save the day when it's absolutely necessary, but it's financing of later resort. The better plan, the more times you've gone through the cycle, the easier it is, right? The very first time when you're starting a business and you burnt all that cash in innovation without anything except your investors keeping the cushion, that's when Mez really comes in handy to allow you to capitalize your resources and get that first phase of fruition. But ideally, by the second phase of fruition, you won't need it because you'll have been able to save some reserves to get you through the burn of bifurcation.
Exactly. And just to, not to belabor this, but just to really anchor this and make this real world, a classic situation that will sometimes call for mezzanine funding is where you've gone into the fruition phase, you're early into it. So like you were just saying, Jason, you haven't built up your reserves yet. And this massive order from a big chain comes in, and you may have the capacity to fill the order, but you don't have the funding to cover the costs of fulfilling that large an order at the front end. But if you've contracted that order correctly, at the back end, you will have made so much profit from that huge order that paying back the mezzanine funding to aid with cash flow at the beginning is a no-brainer because your profit margins are so good that you'll have plenty of profit left over after paying back the mezzanine funding.
Absolutely. There's so many cases where you hit explosive growth, where you think you're driving a Peugeot and next thing you know, you're in a rocket ship. And making sure that you have capital and finance options in those eventualities are really important. And that's where Mez does its thing beautifully.
And this is part of why eliminating waste during the fruition phase is so important, because it's easy to get intoxicated when profits start coming in, when revenue levels start reaching the point where you're more than covering your costs, because then the intoxication factor could cause you to increase your waste rather than reduce it. And it's really important to reduce or eliminate waste during the fruition phase, because the more you do that, the more you're able to build your nest egg for the next phase, the bifurcation phase that we'll get into in the next episode.
Beautiful. I love it. Well said. And then the last piece of this profitizing phase is when we talked about the innovation phase, it's all inward looking, right? We're all looking at this product and perfecting the product or service we're going to bring out to the world. We've done enough peeking out the windows to be confident that there's a market out there. But we're not worried about our competition. We're not worried about our buyer avatar. We're not worried too much about any of those things until we're going to sell it to them. And so in this fruition phase, you have to be looking out more than in. You're still looking in a lot in that quality improvement and that optimization, but you really have to be spending a lot of time looking at, okay, how do you fit? What's your competitive advantage? What are competitors doing to try to knock you down as you're trying to take market share? What is the buyer response? And how do you have to navigate those waters to ensure that your proposal of competitive advantage and value delivery aligns with their reception of your advantage and value delivery? And so there's a lot of that tweaking and adjusting within the marketplace as well as within your delivery cycle to make sure that you are the option of choice for your clients and that you're delivering on your promises, whether your promise is to be the low-cost leader, to be the top quality leader, or to be the top service leader. You can never do all three, but you can usually do two pretty well if you're paying attention. You have to decide what your promise is as you begin this fruition, and then spend a lot of time getting the voice of the consumer and assessing your competitive marketplace to ensure that you're delivering on that promise.
Beautifully said. And what I'll piggyback on as a point of emphasis is that, at least before you and I get into all of the dimensions of what doesn't happen during the fruition phase, the preface that I want to offer about that is that what doesn't happen is creativity doesn't vanish during the fruition phase. In the fruition phase, creativity is laser focused solely on fruition dimensions that we've just been touching on. So there's a lot of creativity that is involved and needs to be brought to bear as you're refining your avatar profile based on market response in the fruition phase. So don't be thinking that fruition means kicking out creativity. It absolutely is necessary in the fruition phase, but it needs to be very narrow and focused in what the creativity energy is devoted to. So with that said, what else doesn't happen during the fruition phase? If fruition is done right, and of course, this is a big caveat, and what we mean by right, we've just finished describing a whole bunch of, but if fruition is done right, big changes do not happen in this phase. A whole bunch of incremental small tweaks happen throughout this phase, but big changes happen during innovation or bifurcation. They don't happen during the fruition phase.
I really appreciate that. And I love that point that you talked about, that creativity doesn't die, it gets focused. It's an entirely different type of creativity. It's a critical creative skill to excel in fruition, but it's an entirely different type of creativity than what we have in innovation. I think that's great to understand because I've heard several different industries or practices where creativity goes to die. I like to say that about all my accountant friends because it's fun to pick on my accountant friends. But no, I mean, there's always a home for creativity in excellence. There are just a lot of different types of creativity. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up. The other thing, as we talk about this, big changes don't happen. The idea of expanding into entirely new markets is not a piece of fruition. It's actually a subset of the bifurcation, because this is a major change and it takes major adjustments to this uniform process that you are optimizing in Fruition. So in Fruition, you're looking at one market and just capitalizing on it. As growth starts to decline and you recognize that this is a product or service that's going to start to twilight, then you have to look at options. There, finding new markets to penetrate and finding new use cases for your product and service can give it extra gas to life. It can even give it another growth curve. But this is actually bifurcation, because this is, again, starting to make big changes and get creative in the blow it up and build it better way, and not in that uniform, optimized, very focused, creative fashion that makes excellence and Fruition what it is.
So well said that the last point that I think we want to make about what doesn't happen during the Fruition phase is a no-brainer. What you're not doing during the Fruition phase is developing and rolling out new products or services. That comes in the phase we're going to go into in the next episode. It doesn't happen in this phase, because if you try to develop and roll out new products or services during the Fruition phase, you will not optimize. You will not profitize. You'll get spread too thin, and that's not good for the business's highest interests during the Fruition phase.
So true. And that is where we stop with what doesn't happen during the Fruition phase. But as a sneak peek behind the scenes, a critical outtake is I wanted to put fun in here. And Dr. Gruder told me that was wrong, that some people can have fun in Fruition. I just am not one of them. So let's move on with that little segue into the big challenges and threats. And how do we address and overcome these threats before they become obstacles when we're talking about this finite portion of the cycle, which is the Fruition phase? And so the first one is that this requires an entirely different leadership paradigm than the innovation phase does. In innovation, you're talking about developing something brand new or something much better than what exists. And so you're talking burn rate, you're talking failing forward quickly. We're talking about this massive dynamic mindset that has to have a comfort in not having profit, that has to have a comfort in cash burn, that has to have a comfort in these teams that have multidisciplinary communication and no silos. It has to be a fast-moving, aggressive, and very resource overlapping type of mentality. In order to manage that, you have to almost be comfortable leading through chaos. And the leadership style that it takes to excel in the Fruition phase is antithetical to all of that. This is leadership that is driving towards consistency, that is driving towards the smallest incremental changes possible, and that is focused in a huge way. The major focus is improved margins and profitability, right? So making that change from the excellence in leadership that drives success in innovation to the excellence in leadership that drives success in Fruition is basically like the difference between the sun being down and the sun coming up. It's huge and it's catastrophic. And there are very few people in the world who can successfully do both durably. There are people that can do both pretty well for a short period of time. But one or the other of those capabilities and foci are not within their passion skill set or in their position of excellence. And so this almost requires an entirely different leadership team, or at least a shuffling of the cards to what that leadership team is responsible for.
Yes, I think that what you're saying is so spot on. It's so important because we've seen this over and over again, where there have been founders or initial CEOs who have really shown, they've really excelled during the initial launch phase of the business, during the innovation phase. And once the business gets into this Fruition part of the cycle, their out of their element. And only a fraction of those CEOs are interested in and capable of pivoting their leadership approach to right match with the fruition phase, whereas more leaders than not, more founders than not, don't pivot well into that. And we've seen CEOs get kicked out by their board during this phase because the CEO didn't have the clarity or had too much ego investment to own up to the fact that they were right matched for the previous phase and they're not right matched for the current phase. If the owner is wide awake about these things and was the initial CEO, the owner doesn't go away, because the owner won't need to go away if they recognize that they need to bring in a different type of CEO for the fruition phase. The owner gets to continue to excel with their superpowers, but not as the CEO during this phase.
And I just want to jump in real quick because I want to hear what you have to say about financial management in this fruition phase. But the thing that's really important is when you have an exceptional leader for innovation and you get to the fruition phase and they are no longer the exceptional leader for that phase and you kick them out, you've just crippled yourself for the bifurcation phase that we know is coming up. And so a clear-eyed assessment of this cycle and an understanding that every piece comes back around is important, because that's where you can say, okay, now I am no longer innovating. I'm going to step back from the helm. I might guide operations. I might become laser focused on optimizing the creation that I help bring to life, but I'm not going to be driving the bus for growth because I'm not the leader for that. We need that person in there now, and I'll step back up to the helm in the innovation segment of our operation when we get back to bifurcating. We'll still need that other leader there too, right? We need two different leaders at that point. Being opaque about this cycle can really kind of cut your legs off at the kneecaps if you're not careful, because you could lose great leadership and talent that you'll need a little bit further down the road.
And one of the classic textbook examples of how not to do this happened with Apple, because you had Steve Jobs as the innovator who got Apple off the ground. And then because the things that we're talking about right now were not handled in a good way in Apple, Jobs got booted, only to a few years later come back into the company because the fruition phase had led into the next phase, the bifurcation phase, and they needed his brilliance again. In an ideal situation, he would never have been booted out. And there are lots of reasons why that ended up happening, but we don't want to recommend to you that you go that kind of route. As an owner, stay with the company, but be wide awake enough to recognize the exact things that Jason was just describing so that you can shift your role, knowing that you're going to come back into primacy again during the bifurcation phase.
Absolutely.
So the other big challenge or threat in the fruition phase has to do with not doing your accounting properly. And what I don't mean by properly is what everyone thinks about when they think of accounting, the bean counting version of accounting. The fruition phase version of accounting that's absolutely vital, and my bias is it's vital throughout the entire lifespan of a business, but it becomes exceedingly important in the fruition phase, is behavioral accounting. It's called value creation accounting. It's a form of accounting that connects personnel contributions, personnel value creation, personnel accountability with revenue, with profits. And when you get that kind of integration between what people generally think of as accounting with the actual behaviors, the functions, the productivity of individuals and teams in the business, in the value creation process, you get a magic formula for the growth curve that needs to happen during the fruition phase.
Now, Doc, you just served up a really big parfait. I mean, there's a lot of layers to what you just talked about here. I think we might have to come back to an episode just kind of digging through that. But right now I'm getting hungry, so let's bring it home.
Okay.
Let's talk about our key takeaways, my friend.
Okay, I agree. We just have two key takeaways we want to touch on. The first of those is during the fruition phase, the thing that's crucial to avoid is what I, as a recovering psychologist, refer to as corporate ADD, next shiny object kind of thing, the attention deficit disorder that companies can get into when they're tempted to go in a new direction during the fruition phase. If they're tempted to go in a new direction, beautiful, bookmark it. Do some initial brainstorming about it if you want to, so that you're locked and loaded when you go into the bifurcation phase that follows the fruition phase. But corporate ADD during the fruition phase is off limits. It's not functional. It's not helpful at all. And at the same time, what's not helpful, because remember, in the fruition phase, you're optimizing and profitizing. So you're focusing on elevating the efficiency of everything. What that can lead to is status quo addiction. And the status quo addiction has to be mitigated, because if it's not mitigated during the fruition phase, when you move into the bifurcation phase next, the brakes are going to be put on in the next round of innovation, because people will have become addicted to the status quo and they won't want to move on from that.
Man, you're taking away both of my extremes here. This is no fun. But it does happen to be a great lead into what I thought was a key takeaway from this, which is this phase is all about inertia. In order to successfully navigate fruition, you're creating a level of organizational inertia that is required, right? You're slowing down the rate of change. You're making those changes smaller, more incremental. You're not moving fast in the change arena with regard to delivery of product and service. And you're doing that so that you can move fast in scale and growth and profitization. And so it's not the whole company comes to a stop. It's that the change component establishes inertia through processes and systems and automation, so that you can move that growth energy into profit. And the trick with that is inertia, that status quo addiction that you mentioned, gets so cozy. I just want to come in every day and know what's expected of me. And I'm going to punch in and I'm going to do my thing and I'm going to punch out, and I'm not going to have to think about change. That gets way too comfortable when the product or service starts to reach the end of its useful life. And so in the beginning, you want to instill this operational inertia in order to get the most, to maximize your profitability, maximize your margin expansion, and really get every piece of juice you can out of the ripe fruit that you created in innovation. But then you have to be capable. And this is where we talk about having leaders that can slide in and out of these roles. You have to have an organizational capability to let go of a portion of that when you bifurcate, because there's going to be a subset of your team, not the whole team and not the whole organization, but the special little subset within your organization that is going to have to be able to burn, that is going to have to be able to change, and that is going to have to be able to be antithetical to all of the success factors of fruition. This phase is all about that inertia, which is a blessing and a curse. But again, just like the leadership changes and the paradigm shifts that go through these inflection points, if you're cognizant of them, if you have a good management strategy and you have a way of recognizing the inflection points and jumping into them with wide open eyes, knowing what to expect, you'll be much better able to navigate those waters.
Beautifully said. Ready to wrap up the episode?
I think so. I've got a parfait in my future.
Well, there we go. Parfaits can be delicious. So on behalf of the ever insightful and articulate Jason Tuzinkewich and myself, We thank you for listening to this episode of Boosting Business Value, and we invite you, as always, to click on the subscribe button so you can be notified immediately when we release future episodes. We do always look forward to reading your thoughts, questions, and topic suggestions and other requests you might have, because that's how we get ideas for things to cover or people to interview in future episodes. And in the comments section at the bottom of each episode's page, you can certainly add those in. All the episode pages are available through the blueskyadvisors.net website. You'll see podcast in the top menu if you go to the homepage. You can also go there directly by going to blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. And last but not least, Jason and I want to make sure that you know about and take advantage of Blue Sky's free surveys for gauging your business health more accurately. These are brief surveys that don't take you more than a handful of minutes for each one, and you get real-time feedback and recommendations based on your responses to these surveys. Don't be fooled by the fact that these are free, because the value creation that filling out these surveys and reviewing the feedback that your responses generates is priceless, basically. So go ahead and please make use of that free resource, which you'll find on the homepage at blueskyadvisors.net. And so go there today, go there now, right after you finish listening to this episode to get started.
That's all for this episode of Boosting Business Value. May your new learning result in the smoothest and most profitable exit strategy for your business. With the right knowledge and guidance, the sky's the limit to what you can do. Do not miss an episode by subscribing to the show. And if you want to learn where your business currently stands, we also have free key opportunity assessments. Find all of them at blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.